Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight as we celebrate Women's History Month. We are so excited to be doing Bold Histories, Bright Futures, Empowering Women, moderated by the co-founders of Second Act Women. Tonight, you will hear from authors Zoe Chance, Amelia, and Emily Nagoski. And unfortunately, Arlen Hamilton is no longer able to join us, but the show will go on. And as such, I am so happy to introduce our moderators this evening, Barbara Brooks and Guadalupe Hurt. Barbara Brooks, 55, and Guadalupe Hurt, 48, are the co-founders of Second Act Women, a pro-age global network that delivers education, events, membership, and community to advance the businesses, careers, and lives of women 40 and 50 plus. Working towards a world that fosters rather than restricts the potential of women over 40, Second Act Women shifts ageist perspectives, including bold thinking, and creates age-inclusive spaces. Together, Barbara and Lupe have been featured in Forbes, the Denver Post, Market Watch, and Next Avenue, and have presented at Denver Startup Week, General Assembly, South by Southwest 20, and Microsoft, just to name a few. We are thrilled to have them moderating this evening's discussion. Barbara and Lupe will be joined by authors Zoe Chance, Emily Nagoski, and Amelia Nagoski. Zoe Chance is a writer, teacher, researcher, and climate philanthropist. She's obsessed with the topic of interpersonal influence, and her science-based but fun and life-changing book is called Influence is Your Superpower, the science of winning hearts, sparking change, and making good things happen. She earned her doctorate from Harvard and now teaches the most popular course at the Yale School of Management, Mastering Influence and Persuasion. Her research has been published in top academic journals and covered in global media outlets. She speaks on television and around the world, and her framework for behavioral change is the foundation for Google's global food policy. Before joining academia, Chance managed a $200 million segment of the Barbie brand, helped out with political campaigns, and worked in less glamorous influence jobs like door-to-door sales and telemarketing. She lives with her family in New Haven, Connecticut. Emily Nagoski, DMA, it stands for Doctorate of Musical Arts, is the co-author with her sister Emily of the New York Times bestselling Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. Her job is to run around waving her arms and making funny noises and generally doing whatever it takes to help singers get in touch with their internal experience. She lives in New England with her husband, one cat, and 2 rescue dogs. Emily Nagoski is also the award-winning author of the New York Times bestseller Come As You Are, the surprising new science that will transform your sex life. She has an MS in counseling and a PhD in health behavior, both from Indiana University. We are so excited to hear from all these amazing women, but before we begin, we wanted to share just a few notes to ensure that everyone enjoys this fantastic conversation. First, we would like to extend a big thank you to our bookstore partner, Charis Books and More, the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. If you ordered one of tonight's featured titles, it will be shipping shortly. We welcome you all to engage with other readers in the chat, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We would love to hear what you've been reading, your excitement for tonight's event, and the thoughts on the conversation. If you have any questions, please submit those in the Q&A box, which you can also find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you'd like to turn on closed captions for tonight's event, please click Live Transcript, also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please note that these captions are auto-generated, so they may not be 100% accurate, but we will try our best. And now I am thrilled to welcome everyone to the virtual stage. Thank you guys all so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
Well, wahoo! Hello from Denver, Colorado. We are so incredibly honored to be here tonight, and we want to thank you to Random House, Maya in particular, and Kate. We really appreciate the thinking of Second Act Women, and we're so excited to be in partnership with you tonight and throughout the year. We have so many other things that we are excited to do. So tonight we welcome these amazing women, and while we'll miss Arlen, we wish her the best health. We couldn't have picked better people to really talk about the power of influence and burnout. We already saw in the chat, Katie or KC is leaving a job because of burnout. And many of us, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. How many of you are experiencing burnout now, and I was going to say, you think you will be experience it very soon because of your corporate positions. it's a sad state of where women are today, and men. So we thank you, men and allies that are joining us tonight, where we have been pushed to the brink of burnout. We were talking right before tonight's session with the authors, with Amelia and Emily, about what is that number? We had read that a stat said that there was 40% of women today were experiencing burnout. That's not the case, as you're going to hear tonight. It's actually more in upwards of 60+%.
Yeah.
Lupe and myself have both experienced it as of late as business owners. And we can't wait to dive into the questions and comments that you might have about how you feel and how most importantly, you can overcome it. Now, let's also talk about the power of influence. We've heard from our community of women at Second Act that while they recognize their value, they oftentimes, we as women over 40 and 50 in particular, are not owning that value and the power of our superpower of influence. And here is what the dictionary says influence is. Influence is the ability to modify how a person develops, behaves, or thinks based on relationships and persuasion, often leading to so many feelings of so much that can lead into how we feel as people of influence, but not also recognizing our power of influence. So let's lead right into tonight's questions. Women are leaving their jobs in droves, like Casey had said, becoming business owners, getting side gigs, or taking a freaking break from their jobs or corporate positions because of burnout. Tell us what burnout specifically is and how it affects us, and how it is, ladies, we can get over this if it's possible.
It's 100% possible.
Yes.
Yes, you can get over it. It's totally possible. The clinical study of burnout started in the 70s with a researcher named Herbert Freudenberger, and he identified 3 primary characteristics. The one that turned out to be most important is emotional exhaustion, which is a useful thing to think about in terms of practically, how do you know if it's happening to you? We define burnout as the experience of being overwhelmed and exhausted by everything you have to do, and yet still somehow worried you're not doing enough. You're already exhausted, but you're like, oh, maybe I'm not doing enough. Yet you have nothing left to give. So how could you? Yeah, that's burnout.
Why do we feel that way? Why do women in particular feel like we'll go to the brink of exhaustion, as you said, emotional exhaustion, and we
got 8
still
hours.
feel
Because we'll just read the book to you.
So let us introduce you to something we call human giver syndrome. You may have human giver syndrome if you believe you have a moral obligation to be pretty, happy, calm, generous, and unfailingly attentive to the needs of others at all times. And that includes never inconveniencing anyone with something as trivial as your own body's needs for rest, for example. So in the research, there's, the first shift and the second shift. The first shift is your paycheck job. The second shift is all the work it takes to keep a household together. In the research on sleep, they call it the third shift. And that time, that other 8 hours when everyone's supposed to be resting, some people in a household, particularly in a heterosexual family, one person in that household is expected to sacrifice their biological need for sleep in order to take care of other people's needs over the course of the night. Which person do you think that might be?
Let's guess.
Are you finding that there are or that there's more cases of burnout in specific age groups or at certain points in time in our lives? Or is this something that women endure, on a regular basis?
The way we talk about it in terms of gender, because we wrote the book for me. It's the book I needed. But the way we talk about burnout, the thing that's causing the most problems for people is not that they're not doing enough. It's not that they're not trying hard. It's that the world is telling them they don't deserve these resources in this time. And this happens not only to women, but also to people of color, to people with disabilities, to people who in the United States are not first English language speakers. Any intersection of power is this dynamic of being told that you don't deserve. So it's not specific to any particular generation. There's specific dynamics that happen to millennials, as opposed to Gen Zs, as opposed to us, we're Gen X.
Right.
No, it's not a matter of more or less.
Yeah.
It is different for everybody depending on their circumstances, but people are overwhelmingly exhausted and yet feeling
And there was
guilty.
conversation in the chat of like, I would be less burnt out if I got paid more.
100%.
That's
Yep.
100%.
Yep.
I mean,
Especially when it comes to
that's
business
not
owners.
because you're still giving more than you have.
Right.
But if you're not on top of that, worried about whether or not you can pay your bills,
Right.
like that's a whole, like that removes one of these stressors. And there's two basic approaches to dealing with burnout. There's eliminating as many of the causes of your stress as you can. And then there's dealing with the physical stress in your body. And the good news is that you can deal with the stress in your body. You can complete what we call the stress response cycle and begin to feel better and be healthier without waiting for all of your problems to go away. You do not have to wait for the world to be a better place.
I also want to add that for people who even are being paid sufficiently, we live in a world where it is legal to pay someone a wage that they can work 40 hours a week, but not be able to pay for their own housing and food. Like we work in a society
living
where it is
expense.
legal to
Yeah.
pay someone
Wow.
a wage, but they have to work 3 jobs in order to raise children. And that is unconscionable. And we underpay teachers, we underpay medical workers, and the whole system suffers when our teachers can't thrive and when our medical workers can't care for us. So, sorry, did I just go? on a
Amelia
rant?
has feelings.
I have feelings.
No, you're right. And,
So
and you
true.
know what I would love to know is the women and men that are here, how did they experience burnout? Again, let's talk a little bit in the human giver syndrome. Specifically, as you said, I mean, your body with its instinct for self-preservation knows on some level that the human giver syndrome is slowly killing you, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, that is deep and huge. That's got to also lead to mental depression. So we're not only exhausted, but we're also depressed. We're feeling, not enough, and all those things
Anxiety.
that we as women
Endure. And I feel like that, Zoe, kind of comes into this idea of not recognizing and not flexing our own influence.
exactly.
That kind of creates these like, I need to keep going. I need to keep going. Like, what's your take on that?
My take on that is complicated because partly yes, and I'm here to empower everyone who's here with us and watches it later as much as I can as an individual. But I also feel very strongly that when people like me are brought in to say, here's how to advocate for yourself and here's how to say no, it's putting even more pressure on the individual, where really the burnout is coming from the world around us and individuals around us, bosses,
Social
policies at
media.
work. So yeah, so I what I end up doing is also problematic to me, which is saying at the same time as you're advocating for yourself and you're drawing boundaries and you're using your influence to create good things for you and the people in your immediate vicinity, I believe absolutely we have to be using our powers of influence to be changing the system so that other people are not going to be in the same position we are, where we're meditating and we're doing gratitude journals and all of these things. So it sucks that I'm saying you have to do both. But right now, that's the situation we're in.
Well, but what I
And
love is though that there's a different perspective. Like it's like, I think with the one thing that I got out of it is like, it's not you ladies and gents, like you're not to blame for kind of feeling this way. It's like all these kind of societal pressures that we allow in that start to define us and we start to kind of buckle under it. So there's a little bit of a kind of a balance, like an ebb and flow to it in essence, where we need to recognize what we're being asked to do in conjunction with the cultural, social pressures that we're feeling, but then be able to recognize, hey, when is this causing more good or more harm than good in essence?
But the problem is we're not asking for help. Women
That's true
are
too.
prone not to ask for help because then that shows in our eyes vulnerability which is not the case. We hear this time and time again where we just keep going, as you're saying. All three of you were saying, well, why are we asking
And
for help?
it's actually even worse than that not only do women ask for help less often, but women are asked for help far more often. And because of norms around caretaking and warmth and things like this, women are expected to say yes when people ask us for help. So we're less likely to say no when we do get asked. So we find ourselves so taxed and so burnt out that we don't even have the energy to be asking for the help that we want, to do the great things that we dream of. So we're burning out while playing small. And this just hurts my soul.
And then it's called selfishness, right?
Right.
Emily and Amelia, let's talk about selfishness.
I'd like to spin this in the direction of hope, if possible. That people feel like they're alone in their suffering, and they can see that everyone around them is also suffering, and it feels like you would just be a burden to them if you asked for help. It turns out that's not true. It turns out that when we are in relationships where we turn toward each other's challenges with kindness and compassion, that doesn't drain us more of energy. It actually increases the amount of energy we experience. We've all had situations where we like help a friend in need and we don't feel exhausted by that. It is uplifting and it fills us and it fuels us for most people. So it turns out that if we, instead of allowing ourselves to isolate and burn out as individuals, if we don't do the opposite thing, which is like trying to shove everybody else down so that we can get what we need, like the Hunger Games. But if we instead choose option number 3, which is to turn toward each other's challenges and challenging feelings with kindness and compassion, that actually creates more energy in the world. This in fact is the cure for burnout. The cure for burnout is not self-care. It never has been. That's just a marketing tactic. The cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other. Like this is a pretty good example of it right here, what we're doing now.
This is the most.
So how do we
important
stop the
thing
cycle?
writing
What is
book.
how do you recognize it in a friend who may not be willing to admit it? How do you then be there for the person? And what is the question you ask of someone?
So this looks
Pull it
different
out
in
of
every relationship, but I can tell you what it looks like in our relationship. So as we were finishing writing Burnout, I was also writing my TED Talk.
I was finishing Burnout. She was writing her TED Talk.
And when I get stressed, when I get overwhelmed, I become a little cranky. I become total unpleasant to be around.
I do it too. I like it's my but
so Amelia was going to go with me to TED as my emotional support peacock, but she was having trouble with her travel arrangements, and she's telling me about all these problems she's having. And I don't know if you've seen Moana and remember Tika, the lava monster, but I turned into Tika, the lava monster, and I was like, fine, if you want to go, you don't have to go. I'll just go by myself. It's fine. And Amelia turned toward my challenges with kindness and compassion, but it did not show up as like the thing we're told of like, Emily, it really seems like, no, it was, okay, you are over your threshold. You don't know it. I'm taking your dogs. I am putting them in my car right now. You are getting in your car and you are going to the beach today because you are over your limit. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm fine. She's like, I'm taking your dogs. You were going. So I get in my car and I'm driving to the beach. And I park my car and I walk out to the beach and I see the waves on the ocean, and everybody's got a landscape that shifts their body chemistry. For some people, it's the mountains or the desert. For me, it's the ocean. And like, I felt my chemistry changing as I looked at the ocean on the sand, and I got on my phone. I started texting her apologies. Like, you were right. I was totally over my limit.
But I want to challenge you because you two are identical twins.
So that's
we're going to know. You're going to know when that monster comes out. Or maybe not. But let's just say that it's one of your best friends.
Okay. No, hold on. We have to address this question.
Do it.
It's really, really important. We were not close as kids. We were not sisters or twins the way that people think.
Oh.
We did not. First of all, we were raised in a household with some mental illness and addiction.
Very dysfunctional.
It was bad.
Where the rule was you do not talk about your feelings. You do not tell the stories of what's happening in the family.
Sounds like a Black family.
Did not have, So we're reading all this research, we're writing a self-help book, we
Yeah.
thought, and all this, we're reading all this like affective neuroscience and psychophysiology and really hard science. And it keeps saying that the answer is love. and
Connection. And well, and in addition to this, like we had this upbringing that kept a barrier built between us on purpose.
Mhm.
It also turns out we're both autistic and just grew up with undiagnosed autism. So if there's anybody who would be hard pressed to get good at connection and connecting with each other, anybody can do it if we can do it.
Yeah.
Anybody can do it if we can do it. And don't take for granted, oh, you're twins, of course you no. The
Okay.
way to get to like actual connection was awkward, uncomfortable conversations of like, oh, I guess we're supposed to share our feelings, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We made this
Yeah.
because of what we learned writing the book.
Yeah, it's a learned skill and anybody can do it.
But like, imagine like who do you have in your life who could give you the feedback of like, you are cooked, you are done, you need to stop right now, and you will hear them and take it seriously.
I feel like you need to.
Can I share something here?
Yeah,
about
please,
the
Zoe.
advice?
Yeah.
Because what I hear is partly the way to feel better about your life is to help other people. And then there's all kinds of people on the chat who are going, wait a second, I'm already burnt out. I don't have time for other people. But there's a distinction between spending time helping other people and providing social support. And providing social support doesn't have to look like you being Mother Teresa. It can look like you going out for margaritas with your girlfriends. That is social support as well.
You know
And
what
there is
else
a lot
it
of
looks
research
like?
showing people who provide social support can end up having better health outcomes even than the people who receive it. But in my life, the social support just looks like me creating groups every time I need help.
Yeah.
So like I have my girlfriends that I go out with on a regular basis and we have the margaritas. I have author friends that we get together every month and we support each other. I got trolled
Social
on
support.
social media really badly recently, and it's my author friends that I turn to, and people are lifting me up, but it's not that they're taking all this time. They're not like helping me move apartments. So that's not what's being asked, I don't think, of anyone in this conversation.
I think it's as simple as a text, a private message. I think you're right. I think it can be as simple as exactly what you said, having margaritas or texting someone, or FaceTiming. So I think you're right.
And okay,
Go
so
ahead,
a question
Lupe.
on that. So the idea being is like, obviously we're promoting this idea of recognizing, like, I love the fact, Emily and Amelia's story was recognizing when that other person needed help. Your book really kind of focuses on the fact that, you claim that we're born with influence and that we just don't see it. We don't know how to tap into it. So I'm curious too, like, how do you take that if we're proposing, hey, take a lens and help others look at themselves and know when they're at burnout, how do you take that lens and apply it to yourself to recognize what you bring to the table and how to take care of yourself when other people are, maybe when you're not necessarily in that right mind frame?
Something that's embarrassing about being a Yale professor, writing a book on influence, and you teach this class where the fact is, this class that I teach is the most popular class at the business school. The biggest thing that people take away on the last day of class when they file out to say, this is the big thing I learned, is to just ask. And the thing is, we know that we need to ask, right? And the second biggest thing is say no. And that's why I focus maybe even an unreasonable amount on those in the book. But it's not enough to know that you need to ask. Really, what we have to do is we need to practice, and we need to build our asking muscle, and we need to build resilience to hearing no from other people. We need to build the no saying muscle so that we say no more easily. And I advocate doing these in situations that are relatively simple and low stakes, so that we can do these in the situations that are harder. And what happens, sadly and tragically, is that the more we are in need, the harder it is to ask. And so this is part of the reason that we need our posse of people around us to tell us, listen, girl, you need to go to the beach. It's time, because it's so hard to ask.
We call it the
when
bubble of
we're in
What if you're
desperation.
what if someone says here, what if you're asking and not being heard? So they're listening, but they're not really hearing you. What then?
In a lot of these situations, it really, really depends on the context and the person and the relationship. And partly, though, a big dynamic at play in burnout and in influence is hierarchies and status. And so are you a lower status person? And by status, I just mean like, if somebody's your boss, or you're in a lower position in the organizational hierarchy, right? It's very easy to not be heard in all kinds of situations when you have less power. And as we're already talking about social support and coming together, collective action is the best answer for that as well. So I often recommend to students at Yale, the dynamic comes up. We have a global institution and 40% international, and many of those students are from Asia, and many Asian American students too, and they have a smaller share of voice in the classroom than they should because of cultural norms and other things. So I will suggest to them, just like I will also suggest to women who come into our Women on Boards programs, to actively seek out people who are in your posse, your group. It could be your same identity. It could be just your buddies, and you amplify each other's voices. So it's, if you're speaking up and not being heard, the most helpful thing for you is for your buddy to say, just like Emily said, just like Lupe said, or following up, coming back to Lupe's point. And this is how Women on Boards managed to have a real share on voice when there's more than one woman. And I've heard so many women say that being the only woman on the board is really, really hard. When you get 2, it's good. And when you get 3, you're golden, because you have this dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have the power of the posse.
Yeah, exactly.
The power of the posse.
Power of the posse.
You also talked about too, that moment of truth and understanding when's that right time to ask for help too. Tell us a little bit about what you mean about that.
Timing is something that we just don't think about often enough when there's something that we want to ask for, or some great idea that we want to suggest. And a moment of truth is just that situation, not just the time, but the whole context, the place, when the other person is likely to be open to your influence. And maybe it's because they are having a problem, and what you have to offer can help them solve that problem. So right now, people have signed in to this session because they're feeling burnt out, right? Yeah. That's a big draw. And so this is a moment of truth when they're going to listen carefully, carefully, carefully to this message. But the rest, the same ones of us who are here, we could be like in the margarita drinking situation, and we're not even thinking about burning out. We're not even talking about it. Yeah. And someone could be like, burnout. We're like, yeah, well, so it's like at a party when you are approaching a group of people that's already talking about something. Mm-hmm. And if you come and you join that conversation, then you can get some attention. But it just ultimately, all I will say about asking is the best thing that you can do to create a moment of truth is to set up a meeting. Just set up a meeting so that they have said yes to having that conversation with you. And this could even be with your partner. It doesn't even have to be at work, but you say like, listen, I'd really like to talk about our schedule. I'd really like to talk about the vacation plans. When is a good time for you? And as soon as they've agreed to having that conversation, that means they've agreed to giving you your attention, and you will absolutely be heard. If you want to have a conversation with your boss about an important topic, 100%, you have to let them know and set up a meeting so that they are prepared and they will be paying attention to you.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about opening up our feelings outside of work, because you're a solopreneur, as Neely is saying, and you've got so much going on, is it a matter of also simply creating a list of friends just so you're reminded, those friends that, and you bucket those friends that you're going to go to that friend and they're going to give you the support and they are going to hear you. and then you've got another issue. So you have that friend group over here, or that friend that, you could go to for business. Is it a matter of also that, like, literally getting granular and figuring out who are those friends that you can go to, and you need that support that you're seeking, so that you're, that vulnerability that you think you're going to experience, you don't get, because you're going to that friend bucket. Is it as simple as that?
I see the twins shaking their heads going, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
The most common question that Emily and I get is, okay, the cure for burnout's not self-care. It's all of us caring for each other. And we need to have a bubble of love in our posse who come in and protect us. We understand that, but I just don't have any friends that close. There's just nobody I can ask who's like that. And the image that we talk about how we did it, how we learned it, and if we can learn it, anybody else can.
Literally.
But the image that's most strongly resonant to me when I imagine what this process is like is in Frozen, when Anna's standing outside the door and, do you want to build a snowman? Right. And people, I think, will be astonished to hear how many of their friends are on the other side of that door. And they want to ask too. They want to be on the other side, and they want to share, but they feel like it will be a burden to ask. And they're afraid. And
it's
you
the
just
burden.
Step and be the brave one who comes up and knocks.
Yeah.
And I love what Neely said. She calls them step-in sisters. I love that.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guadalupe, I'm sorry, I stepped on you.
No, that's okay. I think I think I love what we're talking about, because I think for women specifically, that is just one of the biggest issues that we face. And it's something that we see in our community day in, day out. And, I feel like women just need to get a little bit, and I love Zoe's idea of saying, take the smaller, scenarios where, it's not high risk. You can kind of build that muscle, and it just becomes to, creating that practice. And that's something that I think we need to start doing more actively, in order, because otherwise we're only going to see those burnout rates continue to increase. So the challenge is out there, ladies and gents, and in the audience, is y'all got to start flexing that muscle, and start asking, and also saying no, balancing the two.
Yeah. Can I explain something? Just adding some research here.
Please.
Part of what's going on, and partly why there's a gender effect and it's harder for women,
Gender effect.
Are differing social networks, where men tend to have at work, their work life friends and their life friends are the same. No, they're the same. It's really overlapping. And women tend to have separate work colleagues and their actual real friends. So this is one reason among many that are much worse, that women actually have been happier when work went remote, because we didn't lose all of our friends. One thing that I take away from men having these overlapping networks is actually men are friendlier and they're more open to being friends with whoever happens to be in their vicinity. But the downside, huge downside of this, is that men just have more friends at work. And so it's easier for men to find people to reach out to. And women tend to be reaching out to people outside of work if they're reaching out to people. So they have a little less support at work. So
what about entrepreneurs?
So, because I mean, entrepreneurs are still at work, right?
Right.
So you might be in charge of the whole thing, but this is still, those are the people that you're spending all your time with. I know, I'm curious if you have done anything like joining formal mastermind groups or something like that. Have you done that?
Are you talking to Lupe and I?
Sorry. Yeah. Barbara and Lupe. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's something that I think are the women of Second Act Women relish in this community, especially now that we're able to go live again, is that they can come together, and that is their work group. As entrepreneurs, this is their work group, or the Chamber of Commerce for women, or, these other organizations that suddenly during the pandemic, we weren't able to be a part of. So we were only exposed to people, obviously online and through Zoomies, that now we're all so excited about the opportunity to come together, because, like you said, like that is our, let's go have a happy hour, but it's a matter of now it's these friend group, these co-working group, or I'm sorry, these entrepreneur groups that are doing that. That is their place of solace. So yeah, what I wanted to ask you about, Zoe, was the misconception really about asking for more makes us feel that people will dislike us. What is that? Because I believe that a lot of us may agree that's what we feel. Why is that?
It's a huge, huge misconception and a huge, huge problem. And if we're talking about negotiating, by the way, the biggest gender difference in negotiating is that women just don't even realize that we can negotiate in many of the situations where men totally realize they can negotiate, and they do. But women in particular, and we keep saying women, of course, there's lots of overlap, and
Yes.
we're not only talking about women, but women in particular have this fear that if we are asking for too much, we're going to be seen as greedy or arrogant or self-focused, something like this, and ultimately that people won't like us. But that's because we're not distinguishing between what we're asking for and how we're treating people. It is true that we are judged more harshly often by how we're treating people. And I'll leave Emily and Amelia to talk about warmth and competence, because this came up in our conversation before. But the idea that there is a gender hurdle for women there is true. It's just that it doesn't have to do with how much we ask for. And we don't find that out until we start asking for more than we expect to get. Research finds people are 2 to 3 times more likely to say yes to us than we think that they will be. And that when women set their targets as high as men do in something like a salary negotiation, they tend to actually get as much as men do. So a big part of this salary gap, it's only a part, it's not all of it, but is women not realizing that they can ask, and then not asking for as much as men do, partly because our friends are not making as much as the men are, and we're going and we're asking our girlfriends and have benchmarks. That don't
Can I
count.
tell
But
you, Zoe?
you can be.
You know what we learned?
Go ahead.
You know what we heard? I love that you just brought up negotiation and salary, because we have learned through some of the recruiters that we've worked with that women more often, and I know all 3 of you are going to, you've probably heard this, more often than not, men will go in if they fit 50% of that job description. Women will only apply if they hit 95%. They will apply to that position. So there's that. And the recruiters are saying women need to recognize that they need to do that too. The power is in their hands. But also when we do get in and we start the salary negotiations, we feel like we need to expand on why we need that dollar amount versus just stopping and honestly shutting up with that number. Here's my number, 90K. Boom. Don't, because we're hearing that recruiters are saying we as women, no matter the age, or feel like we need to justify that number. Where does that come from? Why do we feel like we need to? Is that lack of ownership of our value or influence that we hold?
We do make excuses. I've heard from my book agent that she has only ever heard women authors ask, should I pay back the rest of the advance to the publisher if their book didn't earn out the advance, and that she's never had men ask her that question.
Wow.
I don't even like the idea of being paid what we're worth or our value, because or even what we deserve. I would like to have people just let go of that concept altogether. We have all kinds of misfortunes that we don't deserve, right? And feeling that we didn't deserve it doesn't stop that from happening. But it also, I believe, has us play small, because we're looking at ourselves and saying, how much do I deserve? And when we're making that judgment, if we're kind and we're humble, that's going to be so much less than we might possibly be able to reach or have available to us. And just don't worry about what you're worth. Don't worry about what you deserve. And even more importantly, don't fail to ask for more because you don't need it. Everybody on the call probably has enough food. They probably have a roof over their head, or you wouldn't be spending your time with us right now, right? So all of us are in a situation where we don't absolutely need more than we have. But that's a small-minded view, because even if you have already what you need, then think of what great things you could do for other people if you have an overflow, right?
Yeah.
Or the burnout you could avoid, right?
Oh my God,
Right,
the burnout you could avoid.
Exactly.
Absolutely have to take care of yourself, I believe, before you're taking care of other people in a way that is in a way that's costly to you. There are lots of ways that we can take care of other people that are not so costly, and we should all be doing more of that, because it just creates more awesomeness in the universe.
Arlen,
So
in
something-
her
ahead,
tells
Emily.
the
Yeah.
story of deciding how much she's going to charge for speaking gigs, and like for the first several invitations that she was like, this is what I cost, they were like, no, we don't have a budget for that, this is for exposure. And she was like, well,
Then you can't afford me.
I'm going to do something else with my time that day.
Yeah.
And then eventually she says, this is what I cost. And they say, our budget is twice that. And on that day, she doubled what her fee was.
Wow.
Well, Marjorie on the thread just said she went in and asked for 250% over the retainer, and she got it.
Got it,
No
yeah.
questions asked, because that client obviously saw her value,
Yeah.
and she held tight.
Yeah.
You know,
And actually too, so even Amanda a little earlier in the string too, even said, well, what happens if they say that there's no room for, salary growth? I mean, I guess it comes to a point where you got to decide, is this the company
Time
that
to
I wanna
go.
stay at? Is this the
Yeah.
company I want to stay at?
This is
And
so
go ahead,
important, that the
Amelia.
budget is not about you and your worth. Their
Yeah.
budget might be real. They might have some wiggle room in it. But if they're saying, I don't have any budget for a speaker, and you're saying, I charge $50,000, there's no way that they're going to come up with $50,000.
they're not your client. That's
right?
not the right client then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
nothing to do with your value.
I wanted to add that this is not just about strictly money, but if you need a disability accommodation, it's the same strategy. And being a person with a disability, to have to ask, I need this accommodation, it's something more than other people have, and you're asking someone to go out of their way to help you. The same kind of dynamic needs to come into play for stuff just as basic as being able to access the same stuff as everyone else. And I just wanted to make sure that we're including people who need something more basic than,
Yeah.
just their salary.
If they need a mobility aid in order
Yeah.
to be able to access the space.
Completely agree. And one of the things that when we're talking about disabilities and lookism and all these other things, going back to sort of what you had said, Emily and Amelia, before, I'd written it down, where you had talked about pretty, happy, calm, all those things. Let's talk about the bikini industrial complex, because women specifically, I mean, we're being marketed to in a whole different way. And the idea that brandism, ageism, lookism, all those things are affecting our mindset and affecting, it all ties into that burnout. We also can get burned out just being fed these messages that are just weighty on our heads. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Bikini industrial complex is a phrase that came flying out of my mouth in front of a choir one day in rehearsal, because they were having trouble. I was trying to teach my singers to breathe, because when you breathe for singing, it's like breathing in yoga, where it's a deep belly breath. And my students, who are mostly adolescent women at that point, have been taught their whole lives to hold their stomach in, and that abs of steel are the ideal. And we define wellness in the book as being the freedom to oscillate through all the stages and all the cycles of being human. And some of that freedom to oscillate
Literally is your
translates,
breathing.
like you're breathing, the flexibility of your abdominal muscles. Yes, they can contract, but they can also flex and expand. And yes, that rounds your belly, and that's fine. Except your whole life, you're trained by this bikini industrial complex that there's only one way your belly should ever look. And if it looks any different ever, you need to hide it and be ashamed. And that's just wrong. It's inaccurate. And it's also the opposite of wellness, because it locks you into one position. And this idea that there's only one very narrow, socially constructed ideal that we all need to conform to is ludicrous and damaging. And the further you are away from that ideal, the ideal being white, thin,
young,
symmetrical, like a certain
long,
kind of
shiny,
hair,
flowing hair.
blonde hair, preferably. Like
Yeah.
And, the
And
further
we
you
as
are in
women-
life, the more challenges you're going to face.
And
We-
because the consequences of not conforming to this culturally constructed aspirational beauty ideal, those consequences are real. So on the one hand, body acceptance, body love the skin you're in, we love all that stuff. And also it's just the case that people of size are paid less. They are not hired as often. Children of size are more likely to be bullied, not just by other kids, but by their teachers.
Fat people get worse access to healthcare or no access to healthcare. And
Yes.
it's not just about fat necessarily, but also not having the right color skin, not having the right
Oh
texture.
yeah, no, we get it. We're picking up what you're putting down, because another thing that our ladies go through is when we're talking lookism, we're also talking about gray hair. We had women within our community saying, I'm about to go back to corporate America. We're about to go back into the office, right? Should I change my basically beautiful gray hair back to their non-natural color? And so now women, no matter the age, but specifically now we're being judged on the thing that grows out of our head naturally. And because it's a shade difference, now we're being judged on that.
Yeah, so many levels of
our
burnout.
solution,
that come
So
in.
many things that are pressure
crazy.
on us women. It's
our solution is mess acceptance. Recognize, okay, so I teach about like body inclusivity, like it's part of my job. And there have been times when
Amelia,
I'm
I love the
invited to
hair
a big,
color.
important conference, and I was like, should I lose weight for this conference? Because I know I'll be taken more seriously if I'm thinner.
She literally had written a chapter about body acceptance and was still like, I know it's good for me, but they'll take me more seriously if I'm
They will
thin.
literally listen to me more if my body conforms to this shape.
Yeah.
So just accepting that it's a mess. You're going to be conflicted. You're going to make compromises around your values, and you're going to sacrifice some things. And it's a mess. And that's the world we live in. And our job is to make the world a little bit less messy for the next generation.
Absolutely. I love
I
that.
love that,
So
'cause that
I
goes
think
to
we've got
influence.
a couple of questions, Barb, that actually we
Oh,
need to
yeah.
now move into for in the Q&A that people are asking. So we've got Robin, who is asking
yes,
about,
Robin's been lighting it up. I love it.
how can you tell if you are experiencing burnout is one of the questions.
Oh, that's a good one.
If you're asking, you are.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
amen.
again, it's feeling
Mic drop on
overwhelmed and
that one.
exhausted by everything you have to do and still worrying that you're not.
There's my
doing
mic.
enough.
And if
So-
you're like, maybe kind of, you already are. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Casey is right. She says doctors study male bodies. Well, that's true of everything and anything, correct? I love that what Julie is saying. While I embrace my graying hair, I struggle to love my expanding, menopausal belly and wrinkling face at 52. I did know I was so vain. It's not vanity, just so you know, Julie. Everybody is going through this, right? All three of you, until I started aging. We hear this often as well. And this is just, 52 is the new 52. This is what and who we are at this age. There's like, this is it. And it's beautiful. And it's a privilege to be 52, by the way, Julie. It's a privilege because that means you're on this earth breathing. So what do we do about that? Menopause has 32 symptoms and brain fog, all these things that can affect your feeling of influence, your feeling of burnout because of the things that comes with menopause that, by the way, we're not taught as we are in 6th grade sitting in those classes learning about our periods. So talk to us about how does Julie and others that are being sold all these messages because of the bikini industrial complex, how do we get past this?
It's the same answer as the cure for burnout. There is no possible way that an individual person can stand against the flood of media that comes into our brains that says skinny people, white people, blonde people, able-bodied
Young
people.
people.
Yeah, young people. There's no way to withstand that tide on your own.
We need each other.
We need each other. The only way to do it is to surround yourself with a bubble of love of people who will tell you, you're right. You don't have to dye your hair. You are worthy just as you are. You deserve love just as you are. Oh, by the way, hi, this is me, Amelia, telling everybody out there, you don't have to dye your hair. You're worthy just as you are. The world's going to tell you, and that's a lie, and you don't have to listen to it. And if you need reminding, come back to me anytime, and I'll tell you, you are worthy just as you are.
And also, if you choose to dye your hair, it is your hair. You get to choose that.
Mine's purple, babe. Do
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Okay,
It
so
is
we've got
hair.
another, we've got another question here. And I guess this one's kind of interesting because it says, what has been your biggest hurdle? And I guess, let's start with you, Zoe. What has been your biggest hurdle? Because, you're moving into a state of influence. You actually were a professional influencer. So what has been your biggest challenge as you kind of go on this road and helping people realize and tap into their influence?
One of the big hurdles that has resonated for a lot of people, and especially women I've been talking to, that I relate to is imposter syndrome. And one of the chapters of my book toward the end, I focus on that. I believe from the outside, when I'm advising people, that imposter syndrome is a sign that you're on the right path. And at least it's a sign that you could be on the right path. And what I mean by that is, you don't get imposter syndrome when you're playing small. You get imposter syndrome when you're playing big. And every time I feel that sense of imposter syndrome, I remind myself, hey, Zoe, that's right. You always get this feeling when you're stepping up out of your comfort zone to do something you've never done before. And if what you want to do, Zoe, is play big and do something good in the world, imposter syndrome is just a road sign along the path saying you're headed in the right direction.
A road sign. Wow.
Love that. I think that
So we're just on a detour. Is that what it is?
It's not a detour, it's the opposite.
All these
Is
signs
this a
that
speed
work.
bump?
It's not even a speed bump. It's really just saying, keep going. You're on the path. It's like the guy at the airport with the flags, keep going down the runway.
How do we get there?
We're
How do we
taking
get there?
off.
What is a tip? A solid tip then that we could.
I guess for me, it's the mindset. It's reminding yourself this is the path.
This is the path.
This is the path. And when you get that feeling, and it's a physical experience so often, and just telling myself, I do a lot of public speaking, and I still get stage fright before I'm going before a bigger audience or some, special stage or a new talk. I still get it. Lots of Hollywood A-list actors still
That's a part of it.
Yeah. And if you, once you,
don't they say if you don't get that anymore,
but
don't they say if you don't get that anymore, then that means that's not something that is impassioned in you. You're not passionate about that anymore. If you don't get
everybody's
those,
different. Some people get it. Some people don't.
No.
By the way, I love the road sign,
If you're an opera singer
Badass
and you're nervous
Boulevard.
to go on stage, it's not because you're not passionate.
So what about you, Emily and Amelia? What's your biggest block or hurdle that you've had to overcome in your quest to bring burnout to the front, of the conversation?
It would be that time she was hospitalized twice over the course of getting her doctorate.
Yeah, that might have been it. But look, I felt this call. In the 8th grade, I knew I wanted to be a conductor. I was going to be a conductor. I made a plan. I followed through with that plan. Again, autism, hello. So I went from the age of 13 to 38, following a single path that I had planned out. And when I got to the end of that path, the friction between who I was and who classical music and academia needed me to be, because as much as there's a very narrow socially constructed ideal for people in the world, the socially constructed ideal for academics and performers, and in particular conductors. I mean, if you Google image search conductors, it's all men. So people just couldn't see me as a conductor. I am to this day the only woman who has ever completed the doctoral program in conducting at the school that I have attended. Yeah.
Snaps, but it put her in the hospital twice.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So that was caused by the friction between who I actually was and the value of who I was that I think makes me a good conductor, and the fact that I was being asked to be someone else by academia and by the classical music industry, which is just no, we don't want you if you're going to be this you. But the this me is a thing that makes me a good conductor, and that
which actually is imposter syndrome. Our last chapter is called The Mad Woman in the Attic, based in language used by Peggy McIntosh, who's the researcher who originally developed the idea of imposter syndrome, and talked about the crazy lady who lives in her head. And I say that as a person with multiple psychological disabilities. I use the word crazy advisedly. Who gets just enraged at the world for having these bullshit expectations, but also gets enraged at you for falling short of those expectations. Yeah. That experience, the short answer of what to do when you feel that conflict, is self-compassion. Insert Kristen Neff here.
Yeah.
So, okay, we have a question from April Morrison. She'd like to know, what are you reading? What are the three of you reading right now? What has grabbed your attention beyond burnout and influence conversations? So give us, are you allowed to say it, Amelia? Because I'm looking at you, sister. Can you even say it?
Brandon Sanderson's doing a $35 million Kickstarter. Did I back Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter within the hour of him posting the Kickstarter? Yes, I did. Did I buy the full year of Sanderson? Yes, I did. Have I spent this whole month reading his introductory chapters to each of the books? Yeah, yes, I have kind of a problem with Brandon Sanderson stories.
I love it.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think we're nearing the end. So I think as we start to wrap up, let's end here with one final tip. I mean, y'all have been given some really great pearls of wisdom already, but if you were to leave this audience with one more tip about what they can do to make their world a better place for themselves, what would that tip be? We'll start with you, Emily.
Oh, damn.
Like a serious tip. I'll talk a little bit so you can, like a tip that they can walk away, they're going to put in their planner or on their device, and they're going to move on it.
All right,
tomorrow or tonight.
Instagram, you're going to make a little picture of it. When you feel you need more grit, what you need is more help. When you feel you need more discipline, what you need is more kindness.
Awesome. Love it. What about you, Miss Amelia? What's your tip?
The main thing I want everybody to take away is that the cure for burnout is not self-care. It never has been. It never can be. The only cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other, creating a bubble of love to remind each other that we are worthy just as we are of time, of resources, and of rest. Love, rest, whatever. It's the same.
Same thing.
Amen to that.
Emily, can you put into chat exactly what you said? Toby or Neely would love for you to restate that in chat.
She's going to cross stitch it on a pillow, she says.
Yeah, and I'm going to cut and paste it myself.
What about you, Zoe?
I'll just leave a very simple tip, which is that people tend to follow the path of least resistance. So whatever it is that you would like to encourage someone to do, make it as easy as possible.
Love that.
The KISS principle.
Amen,
keep it simple.
Right? Yep. Well, with that, a special huge thanks. It was so awesome talking to you ladies. A special thanks to Emily, to Amelia, Zoe, of course, my work wife, Barbara, and to Maya and Kate with Random House for hosting us and making this possible tonight. Additionally, a special thanks to all of you. Like to what Zoe was saying, you all made time to join us tonight. And we're just super grateful that you took the time out of your evening to join us, get a little bit more help, get hopefully a little bit more insight and inspiration to take you to the next level in your journey, wherever you might find yourself. I'm going to leave you here with this final quote by our very first former First Lady, Michelle Obama, just for a little like kind of last minute boost of inspiration. She goes on to say, every day you have the power to choose our better history by opening your hearts and minds and by speaking up for what you know is right. And that goes for you as a person, as well as for those around you. So it's your time to speak up. Want more conversations like that? We'd invite you to check out secondactwomen.com, but also check out the books here from these two amazing authors. And I'm going to toss it back now to Random House to kind of finally close us out.
One more thing. And when they go low, you go high.
Amen.
Thank you guys all so much for joining us tonight. That was an absolutely wonderful conversation. Be sure to check out more Random House events. We dropped the link in the chat. And with that, we will say goodnight. Thank you guys all so much.
Thank you. It was wonderful meeting you all.
Thank you guys so much for your time tonight.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. Good night.